Did Booker T. Washington really call for accepting segregation?
In a way, Booker T is saying we have to remember that our well-being relies on the goodwill of white people. And the best way to ensure our future is to make ourselves useful to white people rather than agitating for a partnership they clearly are not ready to give to us.
In his groundbreaking Atlanta Compromise speech, he laid out a controversial path for Black progress in America, one that would spark debate for generations. Let's explore and break down why this speech and Washington's philosophy continues to encourage debates and fuel movements more than 100 years after it was given. If you love Black history, make sure you subscribe, like, and share. The year was 1895. The United States of America was only 30 years into the Emancipation Proclamation that led to the freeing of Black slaves. Black families were free, but were struggling to find an identity as they grappled with centuries of being deprived of self-fulfillment and any pursuit of building an economic or educational base. Now, standing in front of a packed audience was a former slave who offered a solution. Booker T. Washington spoke at the Cotton States and International Exposition in Atlanta, Georgia, not as an oppressed man, but as a man with a vision for his people to be as free as he was. Cast down your bucket where you are. After the emancipation of slaves, many Black Americans decided to leave the South where they once, even if unwillingly, called home. However, Booker T. Washington believed that was a mistake. Cast down your bucket where you are might be the most memorable quote from this historic speech. He himself was born enslaved on a plantation in Virginia and knew firsthand the horrors and oppressive nature of the South, even post-Civil War. However, he urged Black people to not abandon the lands they once tilled. Washington urged the audience made up of Black and white citizens to develop vocational training and economic self-reliance. Blacks should sharpen their skills and work with each other, and he urged white farmers in attendance to pay fair wages to local Black farmhands, for it was more beneficial than relying on foreign immigrants who were less skilled than a workforce that developed their skills through centuries of forced labor. In all things that are purely social, we can be as separate as the fingers, yet one as the hand in all things essential to mutual progress. As a child, Booker T. Washington grew up working in coal and salt mines after being emancipated. He worked the mines with other poor working-class Black and white men, which included his stepfather. At this time, the only thing essential was helping provide income for his family. There were no plans for social activities like church, sports, or even school, even though he saw white kids enjoying those things. He himself would take on the challenge of pursuing his own education, but that was only after handling the family's goal of keeping a roof over their heads. So when he said, "In all things that are purely social, we can be as separate as the fingers, yet one as the hand, in all things essential to mutual progress," he was speaking from a place of living this sacrifice of self in the face of a unified front. This line epitomizes Washington's accommodationist stance, suggesting that Black and white Americans could coexist separately in social matters while still working together economically. Washington wasn't advocating for whites to allow Blacks into their schools or let them dine in their establishments, but he believed that both races wanted upward economic mobility. He believed that by allowing African Americans the ability to demonstrate their skills and economic value, it would benefit both races and everyone could go home to their own communities. Washington also believed this notion to be true within the Black community. He believed the pursuit of civil rights and integration was not as beneficial as developing skills, building our businesses, and hiring ourselves. He believed this was the only way to gain the respect that we were seeking from white people. The opportunity to earn $1 in a factory just now is worth infinitely more than the opportunity to spend $1 in an opera house. America has always presented shiny things as the rewards of capitalism. Nice cars and cool clothes have been things on vision boards before social media was a thing. At this time, right before the turn of the century, everyone enjoyed a good night out at the opera house. But like many businesses at the time, they were not owned by Black folk and were largely segregated. On top of that, Washington believed them to be a luxury that Black folk could not yet afford anyway. Booker T. Washington believed that the energy of Black Americans should not be on integrating and fighting over social and political privileges, but rather developing practical and industrial skills. He believed that economic advancement and vocational training were the best paths for African Americans to improve their standing in society. Washington suggested that building financial independence was a more urgent priority than focusing on social equality or cultural participation. The mention of factory work may have been attributed to the opening of low-wage positions in factories across the country. Even though the black workforce were mostly skilled in agriculture, there were openings in low-wage positions at factories that could be a base that black Americans could build upon. No race can prosper till it learns that there is as much dignity in tilling a field as in writing a poem. Coming out of slavery, there was a natural conflict in black Americans developing their identity. A people denied their freedom and forced to provide the manual labor that laid the groundwork for the most prosperous nation in history. However, they left years of forced servitude with skill sets that included farming land. Washington acknowledged the harms and the damage of centuries of enslavement, but he urged to now use those skills as a pathway to freedom and to not be ashamed. No race can prosper till it learns that there is as much dignity in tilling a field as in writing a poem. This was another plea to lean into vocational and agricultural work. Just because they were used as tools of abuse, he maintained they were honorable professions that could lead to economic progress for African Americans. Washington urged his people to continue to fine-tune skills in this area and use them to spark commerce and industries within. After the end of the Reconstruction era, which had sought ways to develop laws to bring black Americans equal rights and fair footing, the Jim Crow era ushered in waves of destruction that aimed to erase any progress. The Jim Crow laws began the separate but equal ways of the South, which left many white resources well-equipped, and those for black people the complete opposite. Those dire conditions and lack of resources led many black Americans to seek refuge in the arts. From Jim Crow, jazz and gospel music emerged. Great poets and writers emerged in these dangerous times. Black theater houses rose to tell the stories of black people away from the prying eyes of white folk. Even though Booker T. Washington urged black men and women to not be ashamed of hard work, I think he too would have appreciated a little Duke Ellington or Ella Fitzgerald from time to time. Our greatest danger is that, in the great leap from slavery to freedom, we may overlook the fact that the masses of us are to live by the productions of our hands. Booker T. Washington was denied education growing up, but he pursued it relentlessly. At just the age of 16, after hearing about the higher education and vocational skill development for the first time, Washington set out on a 500-mile journey from Malden, West Virginia to Hampton, Virginia. He took this journey with no guarantee of admission, but with the hope of finding a way to earn admission. When he showed up at the Hampton Institute, he was told the only way he would be admitted was by cleaning each and every classroom. He earned an opportunity by producing with his own hands. He passed on that message to the crowd in Atlanta. Washington pointed back to the ability for the formerly enslaved to use their hands to build the lives they were looking for. Because of the mass of black Americans that were now free, those thousands of hands that once performed labor for free could now use those same hands to labor their way out of poverty without seeking immediate political and civil rights. First and foremost, Washington believed black people needed to focus on building a strong economic foundation. Booker T. Washington himself took this very path. He started at the lowest rung in America, an enslaved black child. Once he was emancipated, he worked alongside his stepfather in the coal mines of West Virginia. He really wanted to be educated, but his family couldn't afford to lose his financial contributions. So, in order to continue to provide for his family and go to school, a young Washington made a deal with his stepfather that he would get up at 4 a.m., work a few hours in the mine, and then go to school. He continued this philosophy as the head principal of Tuskegee Institute, when he literally used his own hands to help build the campus facilities. Booker T. Washington saw what his hands could do and believed the hands of his people were just as capable. The wisest among my race understand that the agitation of questions of social equality is the extremest folly. Booker T. Washington believed what Marcus Garvey and Malcolm X would later believe. Begging for a seat at their table was not a smart idea. Washington argued that civil rights should eventually be pursued, but that economic independence and self-education should be first and foremost. The wisest among my race understand that the agitation of questions of social equality is the extremest folly. Washington believed aiming to change the minds of white people was a waste of energy, Begging for access into their spaces and hoping to gain their respect through legislation and politics, Washington believed was futile. He believed that black folk should instead put all their energy and efforts into community building, focusing on bettering each other through education and then hiring each other. Washington believed, to gain the approval of any other race, black people must first prove their economic value. This particular stance angered other black leaders, especially W.E.B. DuBois. DuBois was a strong advocate for integration. He believed that the advancement of black people would come through obtaining higher education and receiving professional development. DuBois believed Washington's stance of striving through segregation only empowered racist laws and would lead to prolonged oppression. Their opposing philosophies would carry on until this very day. The impact. The Atlanta Compromise would shoot Booker T. Washington into the national spotlight. His approach of self-sufficiency was a shift from the more radical approaches that demanded full equality and civil rights. Washington understood that the power to change was only in the hands of black people, no matter how unfair their circumstances were at the time. His speech was radical in itself as he alluded to the idea that black people should accept social segregation in the form of Jim Crow in exchange for economic opportunities and space for self-improvement. Washington urged his people to take the long, patient path of economic progress and vocational education to gain the respect of mainstream society and to improve their own standing. Booker T. Washington's approach garnered the support of white philanthropists like Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller. He would maintain those relationships, and they would help fund different black education and black institutions throughout the country. In the face of disenfranchisement, Washington asked his people to hold strong and fight for the opportunity to build their own, instead of asking for a piece of someone else's. Even though his speech was denounced by many with his own race, his approach inspired plenty of results. Through his do-for-self philosophy, many were inspired. Black towns and black businesses throughout the South began to pop up and thrive. Many claimed they were inspired by the writings and speeches of Booker T. Washington. Through his founding of the National Negro Business League, black economic power showed its viability through plenty of businesses throughout the country, including being the catalyst behind the Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The legacy of Booker T. Washington's words that day and beyond should inspire us to do for ourselves. Whether someone comes to help or not, it is up to us to lead ourselves to the results we aspire to achieve.